Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. Good news is the weather information going toward the north coast is starting to show warmer and warmer conditions there, and breakup is almost over there as ice is releasing across some of the northern rivers, and the flood watch has been rescinded at this point. May 26th means we're almost into June, and with that, of course, comes increased fire weather danger. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can always check the very latest watches, warnings, and advisories, as well as special weather statements at weather.gov/Alaska, or call us at the weather info line 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube during the day. YouTube, you get your daily afternoon map briefing, of course. We always like to tell you about that. Campfire safety. Well, a lot of folks are going out camping, whether you're going hunting or you're just going out for a little bit of recreation. Remember to soak it, stir it, and soak it again. Make sure that campfire is out, and then double check that. Make sure you're obeying any burn bans that might be up over the weekend. I'm not sure of any right now in your local area, but you can always check, and the fire department's usually pretty happy to tell you about that. Call 911 to report a fire or smoke if you see it like that. Of course, sooner that wildfire can be tamped down and controlled, the better it is for everybody there. So soak it, stir it, soak it again, be responsible with fire, and take care of our Alaska. Fire weather watches are posted for parts of the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, as well as the Copper River Basin already as we go into the weekend. So again, just a sign that fire weather conditions are worsening across the region, especially in south central Alaska, where the amount of rain lately has been pretty low. As a part of that drier weather, though, comes warmer weather, and for the North Slope, you can see the conditions on the rivers have been changing. Some open to mostly open across some of the northern counties there, or northern borders, I should say. For the headwaters of the Sag River there, you can still see there might be some mostly ice in the region, but a lot of things are improving quickly. And once again, the flood watch that was posted for the Colville River Delta has been dropped at this point. This is the latest update as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. Fire danger, though, is picking up, and across the upper Yukon Valley, you can see some pockets of high danger, as well as around the Anchorage Bowl. And northern Kenai Peninsula is some of the worst right now, as well as areas in the northern parts of southeast and the Copper River Basin closer to Glen Allen. As conditions continue to stay dry, it wouldn't be a long stretch to see some of these levels increase even more. So again, be careful with fire. Here's a look at the satellite picture. The visible satellite will show us once again that conditions are pretty dry across southwest. You can see the effects of high pressure sitting across the Bering Sea and creating quite a wealth of sunshine across a large part of southwestern Alaska. In the meantime, where the air is a little more unstable, you start to get these popcorn-type clouds across the upper Yukon and the Yukon Flats. That is convection, showers and thunderstorms trying to develop there. Haven't seen a whole lot of lightning today. And a look out west shows low pressure literally pulling in that warm and wet air across the Bering Sea, driving that northward and having a really tough time pushing that eastward as high pressure is acting like a wall of weather and keeping that very limited. So you can actually see that warm and wet air lifting northward and cooling as it travels further and further north, but still warm enough to affect the ice conditions north of the Bering Strait. In the meantime, low pressure is still just slowly creeping its way toward the Pacific Northwest, and as it does that, it's dragging drier air across southeast, but you still have some clouds holding overhead today. A few clouds over Juneau earlier today. Temperatures were in the 50s there. Many across southeast had a dry day, but southern southeast had a a little bit of a shower passing through from time to time today, and that may be the trend for the next couple days. Best chance of any wet weather will be along the higher terrain and southern parts of the Panhandle, it looks like, as we go into the holiday weekend. Up north, you'll notice this patch of moisture rounding the curve across high pressure and traveling from northwest to south and east. This will be the place pilots if you're watching for icing potential over the course of the next several days. It will be across the northwest coast, the Chukchi coast, into the central interior, and then into parts of southwestern Yukon and the far southeastern sections of the mainland, and eventually into southeast there. That looks like that'll be the best chance for any of that cool cloud moisture. The weather map shows a pocket of lighter wet weather there across southern southeast, but by and large, conditions across the Great Land today were dry, and warm for that matter too. Look at southwest again, a lot of sunshine there with temperatures in the 50s, a few 60s I think we're seeing around Port Huyton and Cape Sarachev, and the points westward. You'll notice that areas of light rain we're trying to develop. Really not a whole lot going on though, with a front even draped across the central chain. Just not enough lift there to really make any widespread wet weather, especially not that hit our weather sensors. That's always key, isn't it? A 994 millibar low west of the Pribilovs and northeast of Attu and north of Kiska there, slowly pushing a front eastward, but remember that's going to fall apart as it drives eastward, just as we saw on the maps last night. High pressure across western parts of the Seward Peninsula will allow for some fog to form. Some of that could be fairly close to St. Matthew and the Pribilovs. Look for areas of light rain, maybe a little bit of drizzle across the chain tonight. And then a frontal boundary may set up across western Canada, and if it holds together, it could just sit there across the north slope as we head through tonight and tomorrow. That's going to keep an easterly flow across the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and with that, some areas of fog. And fronts are pretty good at focusing weather along them. That can be clouds, that can be precipitation, that can be fog, and that can be some areas of stronger wind. But in this case, this may keep areas of clouds, showers, and perhaps even some thunderstorms in the vicinity of Alaska, and especially along that front. If you're a little bit further out toward the west, around Norton Sound, southwestern Alaska, the Bristol Bay region, south central Kodiak Island, even parts of the northern Gulf, and maybe even southeast, you're going to get a taste of this really warm and dry weather as we go through the next couple days and through the Memorial Day weekend. High pressure, in fact, looks like it's going to scoot up toward the Chukchi coast at 1,027 millibars. That means this front could lean over a little bit more to the east and northeast. And if that's the case and becomes a little bit more oriented north and south, it'll probably disappear off the chart and fall apart and not be much of an issue. But I've kind of left it in here for Friday and Saturday. It looks like there's enough instability that we'll probably get a thunderstorm or two right now. It doesn't look like any major focus for that just yet, but clouds and showers will likely bubble up in the afternoon heat, as you're seeing right now around the Fairbanks region, and saw just again yesterday. A little bit of pea-sized hail fell around Eagle yesterday, as we understand it, and we really appreciate those reports. Anytime you get hail or you just want to report a thunderstorm, you can use this really cool app. If you want to get on your phone, look up something called MPing, P-I-N-G, and it's a great way to report precipitation. We love those kinds of reports. If you like Twitter, it's a great use for Twitter. You can't find any other use for Twitter, use it for weather. Hashtag, which is the #, AKwx, which is short for Alaska weather, and say, hey, and NWS Fairbanks, I have a thunderstorm in my area. We just got some hail. It's about the size of a pea or a quarter. Never use marbles. Nobody knows what size marbles you're talking about, and most of the time we've already lost ours. High pressure up across the Chukchi coast is going to keep that ridge of high pressure across the western Bering. But you'll notice that's more of a southerly flow out across the western Bering. That means a better chance for some light rain and drizzle around St. Matthew and maybe west of the Pribilovs there. And we also have our high in the Gulf. As we get into Saturday, look at this. A great amount of real estate in the Great Land should be pretty dry and clear. Sure, there'll be some afternoon clouds, and any of those that bubble up will be along the Alcan border, it looks like. High pressure up across the Beaufort Sea at 1,033 millibars may lock in some low clouds and stratus, maybe even some fog there at 1,033 millibars. It's, it's sort of strong, and it's got some cooler air with it, and it will keep those easterly winds going, and gradually those are going to spread down the Chukchi coast. But by and large, it's dry weather for the interior and south central and the west coast and the Seward Peninsula, and there's still some showers across the southern parts of southeast. So not everyone's going to get the dry weather, it looks like, for the Panhandle, but a lot of people will. So, if you're in Juneau and Sitka and Yakutat, weather looks wonderful. Gustavus, looking great. As you look out toward the eastern chain, a few areas of light rain and some sprinkles there. Out to the west, another wave of low pressure is trying to sneak in. as high pressure is weakening its grip here a little bit across the west coast as we get into Saturday. We'll see what changes it brings for Sunday, but right now things still look dry through Sunday and Monday. Temperature-wise in southeast today, 50s for all. Looks like temps in the lower 50s around the capital city, 56 in Sitka, 59 around Ketchikan and Annette, 57 in Hyder. It's 57 in Yakutat as well. Look at Prince William Sound. Holy smokes, 66 degrees there in Valdez, 61 in Cordova, 67 for Kenai, 62 in Homer. Gorgeous day in Seward as well, 67 in Anchorage, and that was at 3 o'clock. It's warmer out there right now. Mid-60s for Talkeetna. Up around Healy, 45, 51 in Fairbanks, 56 for both Northway and Eagle, 61 at Fort Yukon in the flats there. Tanana was in the lower 50s. As you look further northward, it was in the 50s for AKwx Pass, Arctic Village up around Umiat, 35 around Barrow and Kaktovik and Atkasuk, 44 there, 41 around Wainwright and Point Lay. Point Hope was closer to 37, Shishmaref, Kotzebue, Kivalina, all in the 30s and 40s. Nome was a little cooler at 39 today, 45 in Gamble, about 45 for Unalakleet. Mid-50s for Galena and down the road toward Ruby, 54 in Grayling, lower 60s as well as you get towards Sparivon, Lake Iliamna in the 50s and 60s there, 47 for Cape Newenham, closer to the colder water, 50 for Nunivak Island, upper 40s for the Pribilofs, 55 in Kodiak. You'll get yours. It's going to get warmer there. And 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint, 55, 50 around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and low to mid-40s for the west and central Aleutians. Tonight's low temperatures mild in southwest, 40s and 50s for low temperatures tonight. In the central interior, closer to 40, mid-40s for the Cook Inlet region, Anchorage in the valley, 46 in Kodiak Island, mid-40s for southeast. The North Slope, 20s and 30s there. Nome looking at 36, 41 around St. Paul, a high of 48 tomorrow. And look at this heat tomorrow coming up the Yukon and the Kuskokwim all the way up to the Alcan border, 60s and 70s. My goodness, this is sitting in a valley in the mid-70s tomorrow. And it could get even warmer for Saturday there. Mid-70s for Talkeetna, 72 around Anchorage. Mid-60s for Homer and Seward, 60 in Kodiak. See, I told you you'd get warm. 50s and 60s for southeast. Even Juneau is going to be mild tomorrow, so enjoy that. Nome could be almost 60 degrees for your Friday going into the 3-day weekend, so use that heat wisely. But hey, you know what? For some people, that's also kind of hot for Alaska. If it's too hot for you, make sure that you're taking a break. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water. Get out of the sunshine for a few minutes and just cool down. Fan yourself a little bit, but again, stay hydrated, because for some people, upper 60s and lower 70s is just a little bit much for summertime in Alaska. So do take it easy and do enjoy it if you can. Flying weather out across the west, IFR conditions there through the Chukchi Coast, through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and across the eastern Aleutians. A little bit of MVFR to start the morning in central and southern parts of southeast, and certainly the North Slope. Watch what happens by the afternoon, though. A lot of improvements across the west coast. IFR conditions may linger through the Bering Strait, but mostly offshore. MVFR for the Beaufort Seacoast and some areas of the Chukchi Coast. And still for the central and southern parts of southeast, it looks like into the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions. If you're headed north, AKwx Pass, MVFR to start, but VFR conditions should be seen through Adigan Pass, so maybe if you can sneak a little bit further east, you'll be okay. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass looking at VFR conditions through your Friday. Rainy Pass off to a good start with visual flight rule there. Not a whole lot of turbulence either. Windy Pass will see MVFR throughout the morning hours, transitioning toward VFR flying by the afternoon. We expect similar conditions there in Isabel Pass through your Friday. Mentasta Pass probably starting at marginal levels in the morning. And again, not a whole lot of turbulence expected there, or Fortunita Pass with VFR conditions for Friday. Portage Pass, VFR conditions, not a whole lot of icing or turbulence concerns for your day there tomorrow. And again, things look pretty nice in Prince William Sound if you can get there. Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to see VFR in the morning with MVFR a little bit further to the south. Freezing levels show this huge mass of warm air right across southwestern Alaska. Freezing levels at or above 10,000 feet. That colder air is all out to the west. The surface freezing line in the morning starts around the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island and then pretty much hugs the north coast there. Nowhere to be seen across south central, southeast, or southwestern Alaska in the morning. And even levels are across southeast well above 6,000 feet in many cases, and even above 4,000 to 6,000 feet for the North Slope. So if freezing levels are a concern, you probably won't have too much concern as you start your daytime tomorrow. Icing potential indicates levels above 8 to about 10,000 feet there across the central Yukon all the way out toward the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, as well as the Chukchi Coast. Again, most of that will be light to as much as isolated moderate, but this is the quarter of that high-level moisture rounding that high-pressure ridge as we look at the jet stream. And you can see that very clearly here with high pressure right across the Norton Sound region, guiding those upper-level winds to about 100 knots and letting them descend from the north and west, wrapping around low pressure closer to southeast. Those wind speeds there across the Alcan border closer to 95 knots or so. But the main storm track, the one that could interrupt all of our summertime fun, is still well out of reach. It is pushing some moisture around through the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, but right now that main storm track is currently away from Alaska. At 9,000 feet, you see the southerly flow across the Bering, 45 to about 50 knots. Northwesterlies are light across the Beaufort Seacoast, 15 to 25, and light winds descending southward across the interior, 5 to maybe as high as 15 knots in some cases. We have light winds coming in from the northeast over the northern sections of southeast and the Wrangell-St. Elias region, and then 10 to 25 across the outer coast, and winds coming into Kodiak Island, about 10 to 25 there. All that at 9,000 feet. At 3,000 feet, high pressure is a little bit further north. That's sitting closer to Shishmaref. Wind speeds are fairly light, moving from the north and east over the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys, 10 to 20 knots there. Winds from the north and west over the eastern Beaufort Seacoast at about 10 knots. Winds are a little bit stronger, 25 to 35 at 3,000 feet over the Bering, and more of a north and easterly flow working across the northern Gulf at about 15 to 20. All in all, winds not much of a concern at 3,000 feet. Turbulence in also not a big issue. You'll find a lot more bumps probably in the morning than you will in the afternoon, it looks like, unless there's convection firing up across the upper Yukon Valley, which of course any thunderstorms or convection imply automatic concerns for icing turbulence and visibility as well as low-level wind shear. So watch for light to isolated moderate around the Killbucks and west of the Alaska Range, west of Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, it looks like, out around St. Matthew Island, and also around Wrangell, the St. Elias region, as well as the Yakutat region. But again, most of this is going to be in the morning. Conditions should improve by the afternoon. When we come back, we'll have a look at your marine forecast as well as an ice edge update and take you through those surface weather maps one more time. Stay tuned.
Saturn. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory, and we're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight.
Dean and I are really excited because next week one of our favorite planets is going to be at opposition, and it will be the biggest and brightest it will be for the entire year.
And that planet is the ever-popular and lovely ringed planet Saturn. Let's show you. Okay, let's first explain a little about what opposition means. If we could view our solar system from high above the North Pole of our Sun, as we look down, we can see Earth's orbit and Saturn's orbit around the Sun. Earth is about 93 million miles away from the Sun, and it takes 365¼ days for the Earth to make one trip around the Sun. In layman's terms, we refer to that as a year.
Saturn is the sixth planet from the Sun and is almost 900 million miles away. It moves much slower in its orbit, and it takes almost 30 Earth years to make one trip around the Sun. Therefore, Earth makes 30 trips around the Sun for every one trip of Saturn. So it's quite obvious that Earth and Saturn are constantly changing their position in space with respect to one another.
When Saturn is at its greatest distance from Earth, it is on the other side of the Sun as seen from Earth. And that is called superior conjunction, which happened last year on November 29th. On that day, Saturn was a whopping 1 billion miles away from us. But 6 months later, on Friday, June 3rd, 2016, Earth and Saturn will be lined up with the Sun. Saturn will be on the same side of the Sun as the Earth and a lot closer.
Or if you think of it from our perspective, the Earth is in the middle and Saturn will be on the opposite side of the sky with respect to the Sun. This orientation of the Sun, the Earth, and a planet is called opposition. And whenever a planet is at opposition, it is always at its closest and brightest. So on Friday, June 3rd, Saturn will be just over 818 million miles away, which is almost 200 million miles closer than it was on November 29th, 2015. And although Saturn is always close to the Earth and very bright every opposition, this opposition is going to look great because of the way the rings are tilted toward us.
You see, even though Saturn's rings are always tilted at the same angle with respect to its orbit, Because Earth constantly changes its position in relation to Saturn, its rings seem to tilt back and forth as seen from Earth during Saturn's 30-year orbit. For instance, back in January 2003, Saturn was in such a position that its rings were tilted up to the maximum, with the southern side of the rings wide open, which means that more sunlight reflected off the rings and made the planet much brighter than usual, and the rings look their most dramatic.
Then, as year after year went by, we gradually saw less and less of the southern face of Saturn's rings. They slowly closed, so to speak, and by January 2009, we actually faced Saturn's rings edge on, and for a few nights they seemed to disappear. However, as the years have passed, we are now positioned so that we can see the northern hemisphere and northern side of Saturn's rings, making Saturn appear brighter in the sky. So, check out Saturn this week, and if you look at it through even the smallest telescope, trust me, you'll be blown away. To find Saturn, simply look southeast shortly after sunset. It will be among the stars of Scorpius the Scorpion, and the red planet Mars will be up and to the right of Saturn, and the Scorpion's heart star Antares.
And while you're looking at Saturn, ponder this bit of Saturnian trivia. Of all the planets in the solar system, Saturn has the least density. This means that for as big as Saturn is, it's not nearly as heavy as you think it would be. Its density is so low that you could actually float Saturn in a bathtub full of water, if you had a bathtub big enough.
Saturn in a bathtub. I wonder if Saturn would leave a ring.
Ay, ay, ay. On that note, happy Saturn watching and keep looking up.
If you're out there looking for sea ice around the Bering Strait, it's going to get harder and harder to find it as we go through the weekend, with southerly flow working up through the Bering Strait and over the Seward Peninsula and into Kotzebue Sound. This area of very light blue that we use to indicate concentrations of ice, less than 80%, is going to get bigger and bigger, and the area of white showing concentrations above 80% is going to get considerably smaller, I suspect. You'll also notice that the white next to the coastline is getting thinner and thinner, and a reminder from our Alaska Sea Ice Program analysts is that any ice that's on the coast now is no longer fast, so make sure you wrap that into your decision making as you're going out and doing your hunting over the weekend or the next several days, as ice is on the move and the ice pack is decreasing rapidly. Here's how we look at Friday in southeast. Winds are going to be light across the inner channels, 10 to about 15 knots or so, generally from the north and the west. Look for seas to remain small, 2 to 3 feet on the inside, closer to 4 feet on the outside. Winds could be up to about 20 knots outside of Yakutat from the north, again with a 4-foot sea. For Saturday, pretty much 10 to 15 knots in all areas. One place where it might be a little bit stronger will be the Lynn Canal, around 20 knots or so from the north and west, with a 4-foot sea expected for Saturday. Otherwise, again, small seas will grace your Saturday as we go into the weekend there for Memorial Day. Maybe 5-foot seas are south of Sitka with that westerly flow. Here's a look at Friday in south central. Winds will be light across the Cook Inlet region, 15 to 20 there, and then slow down as they pass through the western Barents, about 10 knots with a 5-foot sea, 15 knots going through Shelikof Strait with a 3-foot sea there. Most areas around the north and western Gulf looking at a light and generally variable wind, northerlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea. Up to 15 knots on Saturday, still looking at small seas. Wow, that looks wonderful. North and westerly winds in the Gulf, 10 knots there with 2 to 3, even 4-foot seas east of Kodiak. And then as you get into Cook Inlet, again, small seas and light winds for Saturday. For Bristol Bay, we're going to have easterlies up to 25. That may be some of our stronger winds in the entire region for the weekend. 4-foot seas expected there, 10 to 15 knot winds elsewhere, with 3 to 4-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, 5 to 7-foot seas there across the Pacific coast for Friday. As we get into Saturday, you notice a little bit of a shift. Easterlies blowing from Sand Point to False Pass, 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. Winds go relatively light across Bristol Bay, more of a westerly flow there, and easterlies down the Bering Sea coast at 15 knots with a 4-foot sea on Saturday. Very light and variable winds for the central and eastern chain on Friday, northeasterly south of Unalaska and Nikolsky with an 8-foot sea there, 10-knot winds. And westerlies from Kiska to Attu, 15 knots there with a 7-foot sea, 8-foot seas a little bit further east. You'll notice as we get into Saturday, more of a north and easterly shift for the central and eastern chain, 15 to 20 knots in all areas with more of a north and easterly flow, up to 25 knots from Atka to Adak and south with a 6 to 7-foot sea in the region. Southeasterlies come up to 20 to 25 from Kiska to Attu with a 5 to 7-foot sea there on Saturday. For the west coast, north and easterly winds moving off the continent at 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas there for Friday. Southeasterlies over St. Matthew Island with a 10-foot sea. Easterlies over the Pribilofs with a 6-foot sea, and 15-knot winds are expected there for Friday. For Saturday, more of a south and southwesterly flow if you're in the western Bering. Look for easterlies around St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island, and light southwesterly onshore flow coming into the Kuskokwim Delta with a 3-foot sea. As we look at Friday, you'll notice an easterly flow across the north slope of the Beaufort Seacoast, looking for 5 to 15-knot winds, and south and southwesterlies coming up the west coast there with 2 to 3-foot seas. For Saturday, more of an easterly flow moving through the Beaufort Sea, 1 to as high as 3-foot seas in the open waters, and the easterly winds push over to the Chukchi coast with a 3-foot sea all the way down into the Kotzebue Sound region. 15 knots will be what you'll see there from the east as we get through Saturday. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. You'll notice high pressure is large and in charge across the Seward Peninsula at 1,027 millibars. Weak frontal boundary sitting right here across the Brooks Range and the Alcan border. That could be a focus for showers and clouds and maybe a few thunderstorms as we go through the next several days. Out across the west, low pressure is dragging in warm and wet air, and that'll stay out to the west as well, but it'll continue working over the ice pack and diminishing that as we go. High pressure is in charge of the Gulf as well. That means warm and dry weather for many. Be extra careful with fire as you're heading out, whether that's for hunting or recreation over the next several days. Fire danger is increasing across south central, and dry conditions will prevail, it looks like, as we go into the weekend, with a better chance of showers across southern parts of southeast than anywhere else in the Panhandle, and a chance for showers around the Alcan as we get into Saturday. That's a look at your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.